Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Andy Kaufman. I've been talking a lot lately about this viral pandemic, and I've learned some things lately that have helped me develop a theory, and I think I know what is really going on here, so I want to give that information to everyone. I want everyone to know that I am a qualified medical doctor. In the past, I've worked in hematology and oncology. I've held leadership positions in medical school. I ran a medical device startup company, and you can see where I had my education. So I feel that I am qualified to talk about this subject matter, and I hope you'll agree. So I'm going to change gears now a little bit and talk about something different, something that most of you have never heard of whatsoever, and it's called exosomes. And I'm going to talk about what they are and why they're relevant for this discussion. So exosomes are something that is naturally occurring in the body. So I have this diagram here, and if you look at the top right of the diagram, you'll see that this is a normal cell here outlined, and inside the cell you have these vesicles. They have a bunch of exosomes or vesicles inside them. And they release these on a regular basis, just day to day. And there are many things, though, that can induce this process and accelerate it and increase the number of exosomes that it releases outside of the cell. And so these exosomes leave the cell, and you see they have these little squares on them. And these little squares are like a lock. And what they do is they go around the body through the circulation, and they're looking for the right key to fit their lock. And that's called the target cell. And these are mostly thought to involve communication. So communication between one cell and another cell, between one part of the body and another part of the body. And budding out of the cell, and it's essentially a spherical or circular, this is a cross section, so this is like a slice of the tissue. Where on the periphery there are like these kind of globular densities or little dots or circles, right? And now we have a picture on the right which allegedly shows this COVID-19 virus, and you can see that there are these vesicles budding out of the cell in a circular shape with these globular dots on the periphery. So essentially, it's the same thing. Now, you might think that this looks a little bit fuzzier on the exosomes and it looks a bit sharper in this picture. And I want to tell you that the reason for that is because when you're cutting these thin sections of tissue to make these slides, you're using this device called a microtome. It's like a vibrating razor blade. And it's technically difficult, and sometimes the tissue doesn't cooperate well, or sometimes the person is less skilled, and you might not have a perfect slice. On this COVID-19 slide, this is, I've not seen a better slice than this. It's absolutely perfect. The one on the left is a little bit thicker, and so that's why it looks a bit fuzzier and less sharp, but essentially you're seeing the same exact thing. And I want to take a look at the same comparison when we see both of them inside of the host cell. Okay, so on the bottom left here, this is a COVID-19 cell. And you see right here is supposedly this is the virus particle inside the cell. And once again, you see a circular shape. And inside, you see these round globular aggregates. Okay. Now look at the top right, and this here is showing you this is less magnification, and this is actually a nerve cell, and this is the MVE. So these are a bunch of exosomes inside here, and you see a circular structure filled with these globular particles. So once again, same thing, also same size, both about 500 nanometers in diameter. Okay, you see the scale lines here, so you can see for yourself. So now we have a series of two comparison photographs under electron microscope of the virus and an exosome outside the cell, and a virus and an MVE inside the cell, and you can see that they are identical in appearance. So let's look at actually some physical parameters of these and continue our comparison. So I've mentioned a little bit that they are roughly the same size when they're inside the cell, same size when they're outside the cell. Now, also the receptor. Now, this is a key thing. Now, remember I mentioned that lock and key mechanism. Well, actually, with the COVID-19 papers, they have discovered that on its surface, it has a receptor for ACE2. Now, I also was able to find a paper where they've identified exosomes coming from our own body that also use the ACE2 receptor as their lock and key mechanism to find their target cells. So exosomes and COVID-19, the same exact receptor on their surface targeting the same exact cells. So I happen to be looking in the virology literature, and actually they also think exosomes and viruses are possibly the same thing. So this is Dr. James Hildreth, a very prominent researcher and academic physician in the field of virology and HIV research. He's currently the president and CEO of Meharry Medical College, but he was a full professor at Johns Hopkins, and he wrote this paper with two of his colleagues there. And what he said, and I quote, "The virus is fully an exosome in every sense of the word." Now, this was just a great confirmation for what I was already thinking, and I was kind of blown away when I read this in the paper, because this was one of the last papers I looked at to find this after I'd already come to the same conclusion. It really helped validate my opinion. So what is it that causes us to make more of these exosomes and throw them out into our circulation? So it turns out that almost every type of insult to the body would actually cause this process to occur. So toxic substances, and I found several papers looking at this. Some of them looked at environmental toxins, such as heavy metals like arsenic, and organic chemical toxins. Also found evidence about bacterial toxins, and I have a slide that I'll show you in a minute. So there's clearly has a role in the communication or possibly removal of toxic substances that damage our cells. Now, interestingly, psychological stress, including fear, which many people around the world are experiencing in a very intense way right now, also causes release of exosomes. So you see how this may cause false positive tests. Cancer, as I mentioned before, lung cancer has many exosomes. Ionizing radiation, infection, injury, in fact, any type of immune response, so whether it be to injury, infection, or another disease. Asthma. Now, many papers just said that exosomes are induced by disease, and they didn't mention anything specific, and they seem to be implying that virtually any type of disease can cause this process. Now, I really wanted to find evidence that EMF would induce exosomes, but unfortunately I could not find a paper on this. But I want to say to all of the people in this field of research on exosomes that this would be an excellent contribution to the literature if you were to look at this issue, if various, especially microwave radiation like 5G, would cause this as well. Here is another slide showing the functions of exosomes as they can remove toxins. So in the upper right here, these green cells are actually bacteria. So these particles that they colored purple are the toxins released by the bacteria, and if they were allowed to contact the cell membrane, they would actually bore little holes in there, and the cell's contents would leak out and it would die. So what's happening is that the cell put out these yellow exosomes once it realized these toxins were there, and you see they're all budding out of this central area of the cell, and you can see they're basically swallowing up the little toxin particles. And so in this experiment, what they actually did is that they found that when they mixed cells with the bacteria, if the cells put out the exosomes that ate up the toxins, then the cells survived. If the cells were mixed with the bacteria and they did not put out the exosomes, then the cells died. So the vitamin C stops that process dead in its tracks and reduces that damage and prevents further damage. And in my opinion, that's how it works for this type of acute illness. All right, so I'm going to tie this all together, everything I've told you tonight, into what I think is really going on here. So what I think is happening is that, first of all, as I've reported quite a bit, there are really not pandemic levels of people getting sick and dying from whatever's going on. The numbers are far less than a typical flu season. However, there clearly are some people who are getting sick. What I believe is causing this illness is that there is some kind of insult that occurs that causes the damage, and then there is a reaction to it, which is the production of exosomes. And when we are testing for this supposed virus, we are actually testing for these exosomes, which confirms that there's some kind of unhealthy process going on in the body. Now, I talked about the things that can cause production of the exosomes, and I believe that those represent the cause of the illness. And I think that the possibilities are that there is some kind of poison. Certainly, there's lots of precedent for a pneumonia-type illness coming from inhalation of toxic substances. There could be the stress and fear could be the cause. It could represent a regular flu or pneumonia or even a bad cold, and whatever causes those would be the same cause. And lastly, electromagnetic radiation could certainly be a cause as well. There has been a major proliferation and installation of new 5G infrastructure. And there's certainly evidence known that 5G can have adverse effects on one's health, including damaging DNA. And that evidence actually comes from Los Alamos National Laboratories when they've studied microwave and radiation like they use in the body scanners in the airport. And I think it's quite possible that there is not one toxic exposure, but there could be different causes of this illness in different areas, or perhaps even in the same area between different people, that this may not be a uniform cause of the illness. Or I could list off probably 20 different illnesses that would cause a cough, possible shortness of breath, a fever, and suppress your white count. So there could be several different causes of this, but I do not see any conclusive evidence whatsoever that there is any virus. And certainly you could see that the exosome and the virus are essentially indistinguishable from each other. So let me just reiterate that. So there is some sort of insult or toxin that you're exposed to. It causes illness. And then that stimulates your own cells to induce and produce and put out these exosomes, because they will send the important signal to your body on how to handle this problem. And part of that is they will actually eat up and, like a sponge, soak up these toxins so that they can be safely removed from your body so that you can recover. So what I'm saying is that COVID-19 actually are exosomes and not a virus that invades your body from the outside. It comes from within your body to help you, and it's a reaction to the real cause of illness.